some interesting questions coming from today's participants as well, which has to do with donations. And specifically, do your donations from unions affect your objectivity when cuts are needed in state worker pay and benefits?
No. I don't have any contributions from unions. I haven't received contributions from unions. Most of the money I've raised has been grassroots money right from the people of the community, and so I appreciate that. Thank you for those of you out there who have donated to my campaign and donated to the ideas that I have and want to take to Olympia. I think as legislators, as we receive money, that people believe in our platform, that we need to stick true to our platform and what we promise the community, what we promise the public. If we receive that money, it isn't that we're buying into them, that they're buying into us. And if someone wants to donate to our campaign, it should be because they believe in our ideals, our platform, and what Doug Richards stands for when he goes to Olympia, not because I buy into whoever gave that money to me. That's part of the problem in the state, is we do see a lot of these monies going to candidates. I know my opponent has several thousands of dollars coming from the unions. I'm interested in hearing how he's going to keep himself separated from the ideas when we need to shrink government, shrink spending. Thank you.
All you have to do, Doug, is read the newspaper. I believe in unions. Unions have done very good things for this country, and I'll continue to support unions. Where I don't support our unions is where they are getting too selfish and not being strategic in their thinking. So I told the teachers that I would not support them. And if you, back to the newspaper, I want to give you quickly a two-part answer. The answer to the question is no. I am pleased to have some union money, but almost none. The unions have left people like me who are rugged fiscal conservatives alone. They're refusing to donate. I am ending up in this campaign more of a fiscal conservative and more independent than ever. Now, the other part of this is that thanks to our state laws, because of our limits and because of the total, I think I've got more than 400 contributors so far. There could be a lot more. Nobody is able to buy a legislator in this state. I find that an outrageous suggestion that somehow you're enthralled to somebody who has written a campaign check.
Thank you. Now, this is a follow-up from a different participant in our audience, a follow-up question to that same issue. And that is, do you believe, as some voters have stated, that public employee union leaders should voluntarily open their contracts to invite pay and benefit cuts to help alleviate state and local budget gaps? That goes to you, Larry.
Well, let me give you a concrete example of the specifics. WFSE, the Washington Federation of State Employees, is right now with the other unions that are negotiating with the governor. Every 2 years, during this couple of months, the unions negotiate their next contracts. So that's a set of transactions between the governor, her negotiators, and those unions. What I am talking about to the WFSE folks, the leadership right now, is outside those contract negotiations, where are we going to go in total state employment? In my view, we have to see total state employment. We employ outside the universities about 65,000 people. I believe that we've got to bring that number down fairly rapidly in the next few years. I believe that we can come to an understanding with union support that we can do that. We've got to change the balance of health care contributions. Apparently the governor is actually working on that. So I have been deeply involved with unions in where that future is going to be.
Thank you. All right, and Doug.
Being a union member with the South Kitts Fire Rescue Battalion Chief Local, I have entered in with our fire chief into voluntary open our contract. We recognize that in order to keep the boots on the street, that we have to be able to make sure that we meet payroll. And if we meet payroll and it doesn't allow for us to put fuel in the engine or put the engines on the street or keep the lights on, then it does no good for the community, it does no good for the service that we're trying to provide. So we have voluntarily gone to our organization and opened up our contract. I think it's important that all public employees that are in unions recognize that they're servants of the people. We put them there. It's our tax dollars that are paying for them. And that there's a joint interest. It's an interest-based negotiations to be able to get to a point where it's healthy for the state and healthy for the employee. We need to sit at the table with them. We need to bargain and find out what it is we can do to create a more efficient government.
Thank you. Now kind of changing the focus a little bit, and this question to you, Doug, is we are the only state to not tax tribal casinos. Considering we need to raise some revenue, do you support a tax on tribal casinos to go into the general fund?
Well, on paper, that sounds easy. We'll just tax the tribal casinos. You know, yeah, sure, it sounds great. We get the revenue from them. But see, they're an entity that is beyond the state. There's federal laws that are involved with that that we can't touch, and we need to honor the agreements. I am part Native American, so I recognize that an agreement is an agreement. And if you want to renegotiate that agreement, that's great. We can go sit at the table with the tribes and we can renegotiate that. Let them know what our interests are. Let them know how they can help the state be prosperous. If we have a prosperous state, they're going to have prosperous tribes. But we can't just arbitrarily do it. That's not good rule. That's not good rule of law. We need to be able to sit down with them, negotiate that, and let them know where we need to need their help in contributing to the broader tax base.
Interesting question. Here's what I'm doing about gambling receipts or gambling revenues. Because the tribes are independent, sovereign nations, the governor and the feds are the ones who do the negotiating. In many of our restaurants around this state, we have pull tabs that are non-tribal. So you can go into the restaurant, I've forgotten to look in front of the Clover whether you can do this. Oregon changed those pull tabs to little machines that sit in the counter. And it looks to us like, according to the Washington Restaurant Association, who's one of my supporters, that if we made that change, we might generate more than $700 million a year. Now, personally, I don't like the idea of taxing or gambling, but in this situation, that may be a sensible thing to do. So one of the things I may need to introduce next time is that idea.
Thank you. All right, so now moving on to transportation. How will you equalize Washington Department of Transportation spending, which has 80% of the budget being spent on 4% of the populace? How would you equalize the Department of Transportation spending, which has 80% of their budget being spent on 4% of the populace?
I'm mystified by the statistics. Whoever behind that question, I simply don't recognize those numbers. Let me tell you what because this is a very important problem. If you mapped the money going into transportation, it would look like Mount Rainier. It used to be about $1.1 billion biennium. Now it's 4.1. That's the nickel tax, gas tax, the TP tax, the federal money. That's all going away. Within 3 or 4 years, we're going to be back down at just above $1 billion. So the problem we have now, an urgent problem that we need to be just discussing in this campaign, is what are we going to do about transportation? How are we going to continue to fund roads, road repair? How are we going to fund transit? What's the mix of transit, high-speed rail? How are we going to keep the ferries going? Those are very urgent questions that are facing all of us in the next couple of years.
I too am a little bit, mystified as word, but those numbers just don't seem 100% accurate. But there is a large majority of money going into the projects, 80% of them. I think once again we get to the greater issue of mismanagement. You know, we can see several of the debacles that have gone on in the transportation system, whether it's in the ferry system, whether it's at the interchange in Alley Valley. When you have that kind of mismanagement, over-regulated, large middle management where money is funneled in and wasted, what happens is very few of the prioritized projects get accomplished. we need to accomplish the projects that we put on the list as priorities. We need to make sure that we efficiently put those dollars to them. And if we're efficiently putting those dollars to them, that means we're going to move farther down that list, which means we'll reach out farther from the urban areas and get out to some of the rural areas and fulfill those needs of the people who are contributing to those transportation dollars. Thank you.
So staying on transportation, hopefully this one's a little bit clearer, which is Vision 2040 calls for making most state arterial highways toll roads. Will you vote for legislation to make Vision 2040 a reality, and which highway would you place on a toll first?
I am opposed to tolling the roads. I think the 2040 vision is it's got a self-interest in it. I do not see it as a legitimate plan to move forward with. I think the transportation situation needs looking at, needs reform, but the 2040 is not the kind of reform that we need. I will not vote for legislation on that, and I will not propose tolling on the roads.
Again, a very quick two-part answer. What about tolling itself? If you, I'm sure everybody here drives across the bridge, the Blue Narrows Bridge. We're going to keep moving that forward. Tolling has now moved to the places where we no longer need people in the toll booths. You can do open road tolling with cameras. We already have the good to go stickers. We can use cameras to simply build the address and the license plate. That will let us save more money and keep those tolls down. If you go back to that hump of how much money we're spending on transportation, how little we're going to be spending in the years ahead, we've got to figure out how to respond to that highway construction problem. I recently sat with the CAPO folks and listened again to their anxieties about 2040. That makes a lot of sense to me. We certainly don't want toll roads, you know, spreading every place. You couldn't even drive down Wheaton Way without a good to go sticker. But there are going to be some places where tolling makes sense and actually saves us money. Thank you.